What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't your situation, your resources, or your past, but the way you think about all of it? Because most people go through life reacting instead of questioning, accepting, and instead of analyzing and repeating patterns without ever stopping to ask if those patterns actually make sense. And that's dangerous because when you don't think deeply, you default to what's easy, what's familiar, and what everyone else is doing. And that path almost never ever leads anywhere meaningful. It just keeps you busy, distracted, and slowly drifting into a direction you didn't consciously choose. And one day you wake up realizing you've been living in autopilot, making decisions based on comfort instead of intention. And that realization hits harder because it forces you to confront how much of your life has been shaped by habits you never questions, beliefs you never challenged, and fears you never examined. And this is where things start to shift because the moment you begin to think differently, everything else follows. Your decisions change and your priorities adjust, and your tolerance for mediocrity is it drops. But getting to that point requires honesty. The kind of honesty most people avoid because it's uncomfortable, and it exposes the contradictions, it highlights the excuses, and it forces you to admit that maybe the life you have right now is a direct result of the choices you've been making. And not just the circumstances you've been given, and that's not an easy thing to accept, but it is a necessary one because without ownership, there is no control. And without control, there's no change. So if you want a different outcome, you have to start by questioning the inputs and what you consume, what you believe, and how you interpret your experiences, because your mind doesn't just reflect reality. It filters it, it shapes it. And if that filter is built on ultimately, limiting beliefs, negative assumptions, or outdated narratives, then everything you see will reinforce those patterns, even if they're not accurate. And that's how people stay stuck, not because they can't move forward, but because they're interpreting everything in a way that justifies staying where they are. And breaking that cycle starts with awareness, noticing your thoughts instead of blindly following them, and asking yourself why you think the way you do and where those beliefs came from and whether they're actually serving you, because a lot of what you believe what isn't based on fact, it's based on repetition, things you've heard enough times that they feel true even if they're not. And once you realize that, you gain the ability to rewrite those narratives, to replace limiting beliefs with ones that actually support your growth. And that doesn't mean lying to yourself, though, or ignoring your reality. It means choosing interpretations that push you forward instead of holding you back. And that shift alone can change a lot of things. It can change everything because your actions are driven by your beliefs. And if you believe something is possible, you'll act differently than if you believe it's out of reach. And those actions, they compound over time into results, and which then reinforce your beliefs, creating a loop that either works for you or against you. And most people, they're stuck in loops they didn't even consciously choose, loops built on fear, doubt, and avoidance. And the only way out is to interpret the pattern with intentional thought, to pause and ask better questions. Not why is this happening to me, but can I do this with this? Or not what if I fail, but what if I learn? And not why is it so hard, but what does this require from me? And those questions matter because they shift your focus from problems to possibilities and from obstacles to actions. And that shift changes how you respond to challenges. Instead of avoiding them, you engage with them. You see them as opportunities to grow rather than threats to your comfort. And that mindset is what separates people who progress from those who stay stuck. Because growth isn't about having an easy path, it's about having the perspective to navigate a difficult one. And perspective is something you can develop, it's not fixed. It's shaped by what you choose to focus on and how you frame your experiences and the standards you hold yourself to. And those standards are critical because they determine what you accept, what you tolerate, and what you strive for. And if your standards are low, your thinking will reflect that. You'll justify shortcuts, making excuses, and settle for less than you're capable of. But if your standards are high, your thinking shifts. You start asking better questions, making better decisions, and holding yourself accountable to a higher level. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a progress, but it starts with a single decision to stop thinking the way you've been thinking and start challenging it. to stop accepting your current mindset as fixed and start seeing it as something you can upgrade. And that upgrade requires effort. It requires you to step us outside of your comfort zone, to expose yourself to new ideas, to seek out perspectives that challenge your assumptions, and to actually reflect on what you're learning instead of just consuming it. Because information alone doesn't change anything. It's the application that matters. And application starts with thinking and with taking what you've learned and asking how it applies to into your life and what you need to change and what actions you need to take. And that process of reflection is where real growth does happen. Not in the moment. You hear something new, but in the moment you sit with it, you analyze it and decide what to do with it. And most people skip that part. They move from one piece of content to the next without over pausing to think. And as a result, nothing sticks, nothing changes, and they stay in the same place despite consuming more and more information. And that's why thinking is so powerful, because it turns into transformation. It bridges the gap between knowing and doing. And without it, you're just collecting ideas without even turning them into results. And that's a waste of potential, because you have the ability to work deeply, to question, to analyze, to create new perspectives, and to use those perspectives to guide your actions. And when you do that constantly and consistently, you start to see patterns. You start to understand what works and what doesn't, and you become more intentional with your choices. And that's intentionally is what creates progress, because you're no longer drifting, you're directing, you're making decisions based on clarity instead of impulse. And that clarity reduces noise. It helps you focus on what actually matters instead of getting distracted by everything that doesn't. And in a world full of distractions, that focuses is a massive advantage, because it allows you to go deeper instead of wider, to commit instead of constantly switching. And that consistency, it leads to results, not instantly, but inevitably. But that's another important shift in thinking, understanding that results take time, that progress isn't always visible right away, and that patience is part of the process. And without that understanding, it's easy to quit too early, to assume something isn't working when it just hasn't had enough time to compound. And that's where most people lose, not because they picked the wrong path, but because they didn't stay on it long enough. And they stay on it requires belief, not blind belief, but informed belief, built on understanding how progress works and trusting the process enough to keep going even when it's not immediately rewarding. And that's hard, because your brain is wired to seek quick results, immediate gratifications, and easy wins. But meaningful progress rarely looks like that. It looks like small, consistent steps repeated over time. And that's not exciting. It's not flashy, but it works. And if you can shift your thinking to appreciate that process, to value consistency over intensity, to focus on long term results over short term comfort, you put yourself in a position to succeed, not by luck, but by design. And that's the ultimate goal: to live intentionally, to think critically, and to act deliberately. Because when you do that, you're no longer at the mercy of your circumstances. You're shaping them one decision at a time. And that doesn't mean everything will go away or go your way. It won't. But it means you'll respond differently. You'll adapt, you'll learn, and you'll keep moving forward instead of getting stuck. And over time, that resilience compounds into something powerful. It's a mindset that can challenge and handle challenges, navigate uncertainty, and continue progressing regardless of the obstacles. And that's what separates people who achieve meaningful results from those who don't. Not talent, it's not luck, but it's the ability to think differently, to see things from a perspective that empowers action instead of excuses. And that ability is something you can develop starting right now, by paying attention to your thoughts, questioning them, and choosing ones that align with the life you want to build. And if you do that consistently, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you become better at navigating it. And that shift makes all the difference. If you found value in today's video, would you please subscribe? I'm looking to grow this channel, and without a subscription base, YouTube says I can't grow. So I would highly appreciate it if you would subscribe if you did find value. Also, check out this video to the right. It also could help you on your journey as well. I hope you guys have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.